In 20 years of collecting books about cannabis smuggling, this one might contain the funniest one story that I've ever read. And it's also a good one for seeing the waste caused by the war on drugs. So this is a bit new for me, but I'm simply going to read out the last 9 pages that end this book and share this story about getting caught at the Mexican border with 200 kilos of grass in the trunk. It also contains an example of some of the best fast-footed thinking that I've ever seen. And that makes sense, because this author, Jerry Kamstra, was also a respected Beat Generation author. The literary critic and Jack Kerouac biographer Gerald Nicosia said that Kamstra's book, The Frisco Kid, is a beat masterpiece on par with On the Road. Now to pause for a word from our sponsor. This channel is sponsored by the National Cannabis Study out of Johns Hopkins. They are looking for people who are going to be trying cannabis for a medical reason in the next 2 months. If you answer their questions and add the public health data, they will give you $100 for your time. Look up the National Cannabis Study for more info. By the way, if you want to skip my introduction and go straight to the story, it's here. Because he was such a good writer, it makes sense that the structure of this book is excellent. It opens with the very story that we're going to read the end of. He's crossing the border into the U.S. at San Luis, Arizona, when U.S. customs agents find that huge stash. Jerry responds by taking off running back towards Mexico. So then the Mexican border guards start shooting at him before they finally grab him and give him right back to the U.S. agents. And that's where the story stops. Then Jerry Kamstra goes on to write a lovely book that is partially a travelogue of Mexico, which is a country he clearly loved and respected, partially a history of cannabis in Mexico, which is a thoroughly complicated and unsolved subject. The best modern book I know is this one, and partially a guide on cannabis smuggling. He talked about tactics like the pros and cons of moving cannabis by land or air or sea, the different types of smugglers and how they evolved into their specializations due to anti-weed forces, and how the market and the prices evolved in San Francisco from 1964 when cannabis was just starting to take off to 1969 when the city was going through roughly 30 tons of grass each month. He talked about Nixon's famous Operation Intercept on the Mexican border that led to a weed drought, the changes in Mexican growing that led to the rise of a superweed known as dynamite, the hazards of the trade to watch out for, like people who sugared your weed to jack up the price, and his personal rules, such as no smoking grass while on a smuggling run, just one hit for testing quality. Kamstra also had a great list of smuggler tricks. One of my favorites was when a smuggler would work with a garage in Mexico. When a gringo would bring in their car to be repaired, the mechanic would secretly load it up with weed. Then the smuggler would find out where the gringo lives in the States. And once they crossed the border, they would go to their house and get it out of the car. But you had to be sure that you followed it when it went through customs, because if you saw the gringos get caught with it and the agents believed their story, then they would probably have them go home and then watch the car to catch you. As Jerry said, if the smuggler's dumb enough to be there waiting for it, then he's popped. He also had some real poetry on the rhythm of a good smuggling run, and why a perspicacious smuggler always pays attention to little signs, both good and bad. That's why it's nice, right before the book ends with the story that we're going to hear of what happened after he got busted in 1966, there's a beautiful story of a perfect run that also explains why there's such a great array of photographs in this book. Because if you look at the budget here from the book, you can see that half the money invested in smuggling these 1,608 pounds of cannabis comes from Life magazine. Luckily, Life magazine didn't know that they were funding smuggling. They were paying for a photo spread of the cannabis fields in Mexico, which almost no gringos ever saw, and which certainly weren't being photographed at the time. You have to know that at this point, the war on drugs in Mexico was roaring on full blast. Federales would swoop into a region for a while, busting farmers, looting and stealing, and throwing up roadblocks to look for marijuana. These farmers lived in incredibly remote regions only reachable by mules, but they still had to be very careful because of helicopter patrols. Farmers would keep their fields far from their homes and hide the marijuana plants in deep arroyos in the middle of crops of corn. And it was a culture to never ever visit another farmer's grow without being invited. And so for these two outsiders to get access was not at all a sure thing. It took weeks of waiting and talking to people and looking for connections and arranging travel into the interior before they could finally get close to the growing region in the mountains. And once they got there, nobody saw any reason to let these outsiders photograph their fields. Until finally one farmer said, "I guess if you buy it, you can photograph it before I harvest it and you take it away." So all of a sudden, Jerry and his partner had to go and figure out funding and transport for an unexpected deal. They managed to find a group of musicians in San Francisco who put up $5,000 in exchange for a return on their investment and some free weed when it arrived in the city. And so then, on the fly, they had to figure out how to get these 1,600 pounds from the interior all the way to the sea and then up the California coast for unloading. And I'll stop there on that story because I don't want to spoil it for any of you who might read this book, but I will say that this section of the book kept me up far too late one night. And so, right after that lovely story of a run that went well, Jerry Kamstra finished his book with how his bust of a few years earlier had ended. And so we begin. From Jerry Kamstra's Weed, Adventures of a Dope Smuggler. My own fall at San Luis, Arizona on August 30th, 1966 had a bizarre twist. And while it did not prevent me from returning to Mexico to do the run I've just described, it did turn my head around. As I said at the beginning of this book, when Speedy Blue, which is his nickname for one of the cops who arrested him, when Speedy Blue told me I was going to be sitting in Yuma County one hell of a long time if I didn't talk, I spun a tale off the top of my head that I'm still proud of. I don't know what it was that made me invent the story I laid on Speedy Blue. Maybe the Percodan, which is a mix of aspirin and oxycodone, so an opiate painkiller. All I know is that when he gave me that sly, oaky smile of his, the whole story popped in my head in a flash, with all the details, ready for any little tricks Speedy or Gomez, that's his nickname for the other cop, for any little tricks Speedy or Gomez might try. I was a writer. I had gone to Mexico to work on my novel and to sell my car. A dude from LA bought my car in Guaymas, and I was delivering it back to LA for him. The weed in the car wasn't mine. It belonged to somebody else. My mind was speeding up behind the Percodan, which was supposed to slow it down. Speedy and Gomez loomed over me like two border bulldogs about to swallow a cockroach. I could see the bulge of the .45 next to Speedy's gut. He had a slight reddish tinge to his face and nose that spelled too much booze and too much sun. Gomez's face was impassive. A Chicano working for the gringos, the traitorous bastard. I leaned against the cell wall as they fired questions at me. I fired right back. What's the story? Who's in this with you? Nobody's in anything with me. I went to Mexico to write a novel and sell my car. It's against the law to sell cars in Mexico. Hell, I know that, but people do it all the time. You can make a good living selling old cars. Or stolen ones. Mine wasn't stolen. What happened? I met a guy in Guaymas who bought my car. He said he'd give me $500 for it if I drove it back to LA for him. You don't expect me to believe that crap, do you? Speedy said. You can believe it if you want. It's the truth. Both Speedy and I knew that smugglers sometimes conned innocent gringos into driving loads of weed across the border. I reasoned that if I could make Speedy Blue believe my story, he'd have to follow up on it. If he did, then I'd have a chance to wiggle my way out. Maybe. The thing about customs agents, or any police for that matter, is that they want to believe your story as much as you want them to believe it. They don't want to rest on a simple pop at the border. They want to get the big boys, the syndicate operation they always imagine you're part of. My story was plausible because I had just enough circumstantial evidence in my car to back it up. I had an incomplete novel in my luggage, a broken down transmission, and no arrest record. And when it gets down to the nitty-gritty, I can act honest as hell. Who is this guy you met in Guaymas? Speedy asked. Is he a Mexican? He's a Pacho, which is a Mexican born in the U.S. He calls himself Gordo. Gordo? Speedy almost spit the word out. You're lying, you son of a bitch. I shrugged. The only thing I could do was stick to my story. Once you started changing it, you were lost. I repeated my assertion. Man, I'm telling you just what happened. I was talking to a guy in a bar in Guaymas. He said he knew someone who'd buy my car. When I met Gordo, he asked if I'd drive the car. He kept it for 3 hours. When he brought it back, he made me the offer. And you didn't know there was marijuana in the car? I suspected there might be a little weed in it. Hell, I didn't know the bastard loaded 200 kilos into it. Plus a little coke and some other stuff, Speedy said. I don't know nothing about that. The reason I copped to knowing there was some weed in my car was that I wanted Speedy Blue to feel a sense of honesty about me. I knew I couldn't play the completely gullible gringo, but if I could make him believe that I was naive and a little bit guilty, then he might believe me. Where were you going to deliver the weed? Speedy said. I wasn't going to deliver any weed. I was delivering my car. I was supposed to take it to Los Angeles. You said you knew there was some weed in your car. Then you were delivering weed. I suspected there might be a couple of kilos in it. Hell, if I had known there was all that shit in my car, do you think I would have driven across the border? I may be simple, but I'm not stupid. A great line. Not even Speedy could refute that logic. Speedy Blue turned to Gomez, his running mate. What do you think? Gomez shrugged. Where in Los Angeles were you trying to take your car? Gomez asked. It isn't exactly in Los Angeles. It's in a place called Pacific Palisades. My mind was whirring fast. The Percodan head I had on was still buzzing. When Gomez asked me the question, I immediately flashed back to a newspaper article I had read 2 years before. The article outlined a bust that occurred in a parking lot in Pacific Palisades, on the Coast Highway opposite Sunset Boulevard. I said, I'm supposed to deliver the car to a parking lot on the Coast Highway, opposite Sunset Boulevard. Gomez looked at Speedy Blue. I know that place. It's been used as a drop zone before. Maybe we have something. What were you supposed to do after you dropped the car? I'm supposed to leave the keys under the floor mat and make it on home. That's all? That's all. What about your $500? Gordo already gave me half. He'd said he'd send the other half to Big Sur, where I live. You expect me to believe that shit? Speedy snapped. You're lying. I am not lying, I yelled back. Listen, the whole car is only worth $200. I already got $250. I figured if he sent me the other $250, it'd be a bonus. Shit, the thing will hardly move with that bad transmission. Speedy Blue and Gomez stepped to the other end of the holding cell and conferred. Occasionally they looked at me. After 10 minutes, they returned. Listen, jive ass. We're going to follow up on your bullshit. If you're lying, you ain't never going to see the outside again. That morning, I was handcuffed in the back of Speedy Blue's air-conditioned Impala, which had been impounded from a popped smuggler, and whisked across the desert to Yuma to be booked officially. Gomez and Speedy drank beer and tossed cans out the window into the desert. You're littering, I said, from my handcuffed position in the back seat. Fuck you, freak, Speedy said. I was taken to the Yuma police station and booked, then taken before the county commissioner and immediately released on bail, into the custody of Speedy Blue. Officially, I was now working for the man, trying to set up Gordo, the dude who bought my car and loaded it with weed. Unfortunately, Gordo was a figment of my imagination, and my imagination was going to have to get imaginativer and imaginativer to make Gordo real. Speedy Blue's plan was to have Gomez drive my car to Los Angeles. I was to be flown to LA, and the car was to be put back in my hands to deliver to the parking lot. Once I delivered the car, I would be put on a bus for home. Then I was to wait for a letter of indictment from Phoenix and return there to stand trial for smuggling. If everything worked out as I had said, and Gordo actually picked up the car full of weed, I would be released with nothing more than a slap on the wrist. My reward for thinking. That night, in my new role of dumb mule, now cooperating with United States Customs, I was taken out for a steak dinner. Order anything you want, Speedy said, and then put up in a motel to await the next day's flight to Los Angeles. Gomez took my 6 station wagon to the police garage, where they discovered the transmission needed a few adjustments to make the journey into Los Angeles. Then he took off across the desert at night, 200 kilos of marijuana reeking in the back. The next day, I was taken to the airport and put on a plane. When I arrived in Los Angeles, 15 United States Customs agents were at the gate to meet me. One in particular, a 6'7" behemoth dressed in dungarees and sweatshirt. Kamstra, he said. My name's Hugh. Glad to have you on our team. I talked to Speedy Blue on the phone this morning, and he says you've been real cooperative. Lots of smugglers bilk guys like you into being mules. Don't worry about it. We'll get the bastard. I nodded weakly. We're going to make a dry run in an unmarked car first to give you the lay of the land. After that, you'll take your station wagon down to the parking lot and drop it. Any questions? I shook my head. It was a strange feeling, sitting in a car with the heat, other cars following us on a mission to drop a load of weed in a phony drop zone so a non-existent dealer could pick it up. I was beginning to sweat. I wondered if I couldn't call the whole thing off, just confess that it was my weed, and couldn't I just go to jail and forget about it? I was in too deep, though. As we drove from Sunset Boulevard, I looked for places to jump out of the car. 3 unmarked cars followed us, each one containing 4 customs agents. When we reached the Coast Highway, Hugh turned left. That's the parking lot, isn't it? He said, pointing across the highway with his chin. Yeah, I whispered back, that's the one. We're going to drive down the road a little and turn around and come back. When you bring your station wagon down here, take it over the corner stall. Understand? I nodded. Hugh swung the car around in a U-turn and headed back towards the parking lot. When we drew abreast of it, I couldn't believe my eyes. 3 large telephone service trucks were parked in the lot, and a man was up on a pole working the lines. Across the street were 2 plain Chevy sedans. Inside each sedan were 2 men reading newspapers. "You guys can't be serious, can you?" I said. "This looks like a training film on how to blow a bust. Nobody's going to pick up a load with all the heat you guys have around. You can smell cops for a mile." "Let us worry about that. We're not taking any chances. We've been after Gordo for a long time." Oh, Jesus. We drove back to the drive-in where my station wagon was parked. Gomez got out and I got in. The weed had been taken out of the panels and stacked in the back. My sleeping bag was thrown carelessly over it. I sighed. Jesus, you guys. All Gordo has to do is get within 50 feet of this car and he's going to know something's up. Look at this stuff. "Don't worry about it," Hugh said. "You let us take care of the details." He turned to the 20 agents milling around. "You guys ready to go?" They nodded. I drove the station wagon towards the coast highway. 10 unmarked police cars followed me. I felt like the lead car in my own funeral. I had wild thoughts of putting my car in low gear and taking off. A wild pursuit up the coast highway. Half the LA police force behind me. Yak! There was nothing I could do. The traffic bleated around me like hogs stuck in a slaughter pen. I looked in the car next to me. There were 3 chicks wearing halters, heading for the beach. It was a sunny day and the surf was up. And I was heading for a parking lot to deliver 200 kilos of weed to Gordo, a big-time Chicano dealer who didn't exist. It was insane. How did I get myself into these predicaments? All I wanted to do was right. Shit. I eased off the road into the parking lot. The stall Hugh told me to park in was occupied, so I parked in the next one. I got out and left the keys under the floor mat. I couldn't lock the door without the key, so I opened the door and grabbed the keys and locked the door. Then I realized I couldn't leave the keys under the floor mat if I locked the door. I unlocked the door and threw the keys under the floor mat and walked rapidly away, leaving the door unlocked. Fuck it. It was insane anyway. After parking the car, I was supposed to walk up Sunset Boulevard for half a mile. Then Gomez would pick me up and drive me down to the bus station. I walked a mile. 2 miles. After 3 miles, I began to worry. I turned around and headed back towards the coast highway. Gomez met me on the way. "I can't take you down to the bus station. You'll have to make it on your own." Jesus Christ, Gomez! What the fuck's happening? I don't have a dime to my name. How am I supposed to get home? "Here, take this." Gomez reached in his wallet and gave me a 20. "Now get the fuck out of here. We don't want to blow this. We got 35 agents on this stakeout." He jumped back in his car and sped away. I stood on the edge of Sunset Boulevard watching him go. I had 2 choices, up Sunset Boulevard or down Sunset Boulevard. If I went up, I ended up in the Los Angeles Netherland. If I went down, at least I ended up next to the sea. I needed the sea at this moment to comfort me. I walked back down to the coast highway. From the intersection, I could see my station wagon. The telephone trucks were still there, and it looked like half the U.S. Customs Bureau was parked across the street. Nobody paid any attention to me. I walked half a block down the coast highway and stuck out my thumb. Inside of 20 seconds, a 1961 Plymouth Valiant whipped out of traffic and blasted to a stop beside me. "Hiya, jump in," a smiling Southern California mouse said. Gaze, I thought. I jumped in and settled back into the rear seat. Both queers were dressed in Bermuda shorts and t-shirts. They had rubber sandals on their feet. Very hairy and very blonde, with surfboard muscles and plastic teeth. A half-mile down the road, the driver whipped the car off the highway and stopped in a cloud of dust. "Okay, Buster, out," he said. "What the fuck's going on?" I said. I closed my mouth. The dude on the right was holding out a badge. It had LA Police on it. I sighed. Both cops hustled me out and spread-eagled me against the car. Jesus, I thought, is this really happening to me? "Okay, hippie, where's your stash?" one of the cops said. "What are you talking about? I don't have any stash." "Come on. We stop 50 guys a day along this stretch of highway, and 3/4 of them are carrying stashes. Where's yours?" The big cop who'd been driving pushed me against the car. "Well, if you want to know," I said, "I just left my stash a half-mile back. It's in my car." "Huh?" the cop said. "I'm serious. I just left my car back there in a parking lot. It has 200 kilos in it." The two cops looked at each other and then threw me in the back of the car. They sped around and took off back the way we had come. I relaxed in the rear seat. On the way, I calmly explained that I had been popped at the border, that the customs agents had flown me to LA, and that I had delivered the car to the parking lot just an hour or so before. The cop driving the car looked straight ahead and nodded as I talked. When we reached the intersection of the Coast Highway and Sunset Boulevard, he pulled off the road and parked. One cop stayed with me, and the other one got out and walked towards my station wagon. It's really happening, I thought. Across the Coast Highway, I saw 35 customs agents' heads following the cop. When he reached the station wagon, he paused a moment, then walked around to the driver's side and opened the door. At that instant, 24 agents burst out of the telephone repair trucks and automobiles and rushed him, guns drawn. I sat back in the seat of the Plymouth, as calm as could be. End scene. And that, my friends, is why I would love to see this book turned into a movie, because I want to see Mel Brooks direct that scene of all of those customs agents busting that cop. The epilogue to the story is, after the LA cop and US Customs fiasco, I was released to make my way up the Coast Highway to Big Sur. I heard nothing about my border bust from the federal government until I was rearrested 6 months later. I hired a lawyer and pleaded guilty to the non-payment of taxes on illegally imported marijuana, which was the actual charge thanks to Harry Ainslinger. I was sentenced to 2 years in the federal penitentiary, sentence suspended, and placed on 5 years probation.